but I did a photo shoot with Justin Bieber, and he was 16 years old, and I don't know how old I was, and it was like a play. His girlfriend was there, his parents, I mean, it was like nothing creepy at all.
When Kim Kardashian finally decided to open up, she didn't whisper. She confessed, "I might get canceled for saying this." Her voice was calm, but behind it was a storm. For years, the world saw her through perfect filters, the queen of control, of image, of silence. But now, in her Call Her Daddy interview, Kim finally tore the curtain down. It began with a memory, one she now calls strange. A 2010 photo shoot with a 16-year-old Justin Bieber smiling on the beach, holding hands, laughing for the camera. At the time, it seemed playful, even harmless. But looking back, she admits it feels odd, and maybe even unsettling. And just like that, the world saw a different side of Kim Kardashian, a woman questioning her own past, her fame, and the chaos that followed. This isn't just a story about scandal, it's about what happens when the perfect life begins to crack, and the truth finally slips through. In 2010, Kim Kardashian was already one of the most photographed women on earth, glamorous, confident, and untouchable. Justin Bieber, just 16, was the world's teenage obsession. When they came together for an Elle magazine photo shoot, it was meant to be lighthearted, a playful fantasy that paired Hollywood's most famous woman with pop's youngest star. Kim was 29 then, living in a world that rewarded attention above all else. The concept was flirty, even romantic, with them running on the beach, holding hands, and sharing camera-perfect smiles. But years later, as she looked back, Kim admitted it made her uncomfortable. She called it odd, even creepy, saying that today it would never be approved. She joked that she might get canceled for even talking about it. That reflection wasn't about the photo shoot itself. It was about how fame distorts judgment. It showed how easily boundaries blur when the spotlight is too bright. Back then, Kim was building an empire, learning that being seen was a currency of its own. She lived by perfection. Hair, makeup, image, everything meticulously controlled. But behind the lenses and designer gowns, another story was quietly forming, because while the world adored her rise to stardom, Kim's personal life was becoming more complicated. And soon, the woman who seemed to have everything would find herself in a world where love, chaos, and control would collide and change her forever. It started quietly, no explosions, no headlines, just small moments that began to feel wrong. Kim remembers coming home after long filming days or events and noticing that something was off. The house was still, too still. Then she'd look outside and the driveway would be empty. Not just one car missing, sometimes two, sometimes three, gone. At first, she thought it was a misunderstanding. Maybe they were being serviced or loaned out, but soon she realized the truth. Kanye had given them away, the Lamborghinis, the Rolls, the symbols of their shared empire, just gone, handed to friends or associates without a word. She says it became a pattern, chaos disguised as generosity. What most would call extravagant gifts felt to her like vanishing control. She recalls the shock of waking up one morning and realizing she had no idea what version of her husband she'd find that day. Would he be calm, euphoric, unreachable? She described it as never knowing what you're going to get when you wake up. That unpredictability, she said, became its own kind of fear, not the loud kind, but a constant low hum that never went away. Emotionally, financially, even physically, she stopped feeling safe. She loved him, she supported him, but she could no longer predict him. Still, she stayed. She told herself it was for the kids, for the family, for love. She tried to rationalize the irrational, to explain away the red flags. She even convinced herself that the instability was temporary, that if she could just hold things together a little longer, it would pass. But it didn't. The episodes got worse, the silence between them colder. She remembers trying to help him, trying to reach him, but nothing worked. He didn't want to change. The same issues repeated, looping endlessly. She called it toxic, but what she really meant was suffocating. When love turns into damage, you start losing pieces of yourself one day at a time. She said, when you keep forgiving the same chaos, it starts to break you. That line hung in the air like a quiet confession of exhaustion, because by then she wasn't angry. She was just empty. Kim began to realize that staying wasn't strength anymore. It was surrender. The life that once looked like the dream fame, private jets, magazine covers, and billion-dollar brands had turned into a cycle she could no longer survive in. The unpredictability wasn't thrilling anymore. It was terrifying. Her breaking point wasn't loud or dramatic. It wasn't a fight or a headline. It was the morning she woke up and didn't recognize herself. The woman who built an empire on control had lost control completely over her marriage, her peace, her safety, and in that stillness, she finally understood if she didn't leave, she'd lose herself entirely. I had to save myself to be a better mom, she said. It wasn't bitterness, it was clarity. It was a woman realizing that love without stability isn't love at all. When she walked away, there were no Lamborghinis in the driveway, no cameras waiting outside, just quiet. The kind of quiet that hurts at first, but eventually starts to heal you. And that silence, that moment of finally choosing peace over chaos, became the real turning point. Not the loss of a husband, not the end of a marriage, but the beginning of a woman finally reclaiming her life. After the storm, there was silence. The kind that feels heavy, like the world holding its breath. Kim didn't rush to explain herself. She didn't fire back at the rumors or the noise. Instead, she focused inward, rebuilding a life that had been shaken to its core. For the first time in years, her home wasn't unpredictable. There were no missing cars, no late night chaos, no walking on eggshells. But peace came with a strange emptiness, a reminder of everything she'd endured. She began to speak softly about those years, not with anger, but with reflection. She said she had stayed calm, even in moments when most would explode. When she found out about cheating, she didn't scream. She simply said, "Tell me more." That single sentence defined her transformation. No more reacting to chaos, no more playing into the performance of pain. She had become someone who no longer sought drama, but clarity. Then came the public moments she couldn't control. Kanye's Easy music video, showing a claymation version of Pete Davidson being kidnapped, was one of them. Kim called it sad and unfair, saying she felt empathy for Pete. She didn't lash out, she didn't retaliate. She mourned what fame had turned love into. Every move she made after that was quieter, more deliberate. Her focus became her children, her peace, her stability. She said she no longer wanted to live in chaos. She wanted to live in calm. The woman who once lived under the spotlight was now learning to live in stillness. And in that stillness, she found something she hadn't felt in years. Control, not over others, but over herself. The noise outside faded. What remained was Kim rebuilding from within. When you listen closely to Kim's words, this isn't a story about scandal. It's a study in survival. Beneath the headlines, beneath the fame, what she's really describing is what happens when love becomes chaos, and chaos becomes home. She spent years trying to heal someone who didn't want to be healed. She saw the red flags, she heard the warnings, and still she stayed because she believed loyalty could fix pain. Because she thought if she just gave more, loved harder, waited longer, things would change. But as she said in the interview, you can't change someone who doesn't want to be helped. It's a truth most people learn quietly, but for Kim, it happened under a global spotlight. Millions watched her smile while her private life was falling apart behind the scenes. Every photo, every appearance, every perfectly rehearsed moment, all of it was armor. She learned to hold herself together even when everything else was falling apart. That's what makes her confession so haunting. Not the fame, but the fatigue. When she said their relationship became toxic, she wasn't being cruel. She was describing a slow emotional erosion. How unpredictability eats away at your peace until you start losing your sense of self. It wasn't the yelling or the chaos that broke her. It was the silence after. She admitted something else that struck people, that she doesn't know what everyday things cost, like a carton of milk. It sounded tone deaf to some, but it revealed something deeper. Detachment. Fame doesn't just make you rich, it disconnects you from normal life. For Kim, wealth and power became both protection and prison. She lived in a world where everything was curated, where even love had to look perfect. And when perfection shattered, she didn't know how to live in the mess. What the world saw as control was actually survival. Every calm reaction, every carefully measured word, all of it was her way of maintaining stability in a life spinning out of control. Her calm wasn't coldness, it was armor. Her silence wasn't weakness, it was self-preservation. Kim's story reveals something that fame rarely shows, that being powerful doesn't make you invincible. Sometimes it just means you suffer more quietly. She learned that real strength isn't staying when it hurts, it's knowing when to walk away. She didn't leave because she stopped loving him. She left because she stopped surviving, because peace to her became worth more than status. And in that moment, she reclaimed something fame had taken from her. Her humanity. In the end, this wasn't revenge. It wasn't rebellion. It was surrender. A surrender to truth, to healing, to reality. The moment Kim Kardashian finally stopped pretending that everything was fine was the moment she finally became free. When the story finally broke, the world did what it always does. It picked sides. Some called her brave, others called her cold. But Kim didn't argue with anyone. She'd spent enough years explaining herself to people who only listened to judge. She clarified one thing that had become a favorite rumor, that she was keeping the kids from Kanye. It wasn't true. I push for it all the time. She said she wanted her children to have a relationship with their father, even when he didn't ask to see them for months. That confession carried more pain than anger. The quiet heartbreak of trying to hold a family together alone. At the same time, she confronted another long-running rumor, the one linking her to Travis Barker. "No, I never have," she said simply. No drama, no defensiveness, just exhaustion. Years of gossip had turned her friendships into storylines, her silence into suspicion. She said she found it unfortunate that something so untrue kept resurfacing. For her, it wasn't just about denying a rumor, it was about reclaiming her narrative. Through it all, she stayed steady. No public rants, no chaotic interviews, no revenge posts, just composure. When asked about her divorce, she didn't call it a failure. She called it an act of self-preservation. "I had to save myself to be a better mom," she said. Slowly, the noise began to fade. The world moved on to new scandals, new headlines. But for Kim, this was more than another media cycle. It was a rebirth. She was learning to exist without the chaos, to live without having to perform. In the end, the closure wasn't about getting the last word. It was about peace. The kind that doesn't need an audience. For the first time in years, she didn't need to prove anything. She just needed to breathe. The cameras have stopped flashing. The headlines have quieted. What's left is a woman who finally found peace in the silence. Kim Kardashian once lived in a world built on illusion, where every smile was rehearsed and every secret was monetized. But when she finally spoke, she didn't defend her image. She let it fall apart, and in that collapse, she found freedom. She once posed beside a teenage pop star, caught in a world obsessed with spectacle. Years later, she walked away from a life that nearly broke her. Fame, love, control, all of it stripped down to something real. The need to feel safe, to feel human. For years, her silence protected others. Now, it protects her. And maybe that's the lesson hidden beneath the noise. That sometimes, letting the world misunderstand you is the only way to finally understand yourself.